Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Baron here, and we're looking at some new tanks on the CBT test server. So what we have right here is a Panzer III Variant F, armed with a 5cm KWK-38 cannon. So we're going to be looking at the new tanks. The Germans have, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new tanks. And the Russians have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as well, including the new ZIS-30 tank destroyer, T-60 light tank, and then some other ones. So we'll check those out. But let's cover the Germans first. So first we have the Czech Panzer 38T Variant A. It's a medium tank of about 9.5 tons, max speed of 42 kilometers per hour, and it has that 37mm gun, which has penetrations of 45 millimeters at 100 meters and 32 millimeters at 500 meters respectively. Now there's obviously going to be upgrades, and we'll take a look at those. So you can get Panzergranat 40s here, which are going to definitely increase the penetration of this here. So let's take a look. So we go from 50 millimeters at 10 meters to 89 millimeters at 10 meters respectively. And at 500 meters, 40 millimeters, and 32 millimeters. So there's a real big increase in penetration up close with these, and then it kind of tapers out and gets closer at greater distances. You also have high explosive rounds. So that is the Czech Panzer 38T, and let's take a look at it real quick. It's a very unique looking tank. When the Germans invaded and basically took over Czechoslovakia for the Sudetenland here, you know, Lebensraum, right? They basically took this tank. It has a very distinct look to it with these two, the hull-mounted and coaxial-mounted machine guns right there. Definitely give it distinctive look, plus all the riveting and bolts right there. And the commander's cupola is rather, it looks very boxy and kind of, you know, almost steampunkish, I would venture to say. So really cool and distinctive looking tank. I'm really looking forward to that. Now we have the Panzer IIc. It's the reserve tank, and no matter what they put on the server, we always have the reserves available to us. So we're already familiar with that. Now it has a 20mm KWK-30 gun. The Panzer IIF, most of the statistics are the same. The Panzer IIF is a tier 1, but it has a 20mm KWK-38. Now when I look, you know, I'm familiar with the KWK-38. That's a 3.7, so I'm not really sure, you know, if there's another one. I tried to look it up, but the engine power is mostly the same, and the max speed is also the same, and the mass is the same. So I believe that the real difference between the Panzer IIc and Panzer IIF, just at cursory glance right now without doing much research or looking back into it, is a gun difference. So like World of Tanks, where you have, you know, the difference, let's take a look. You know, in World of Tanks you can upgrade different guns on the same tank chassis, but in War Thunder the system's going to be each different gun's going to have its own tank chassis and own tank available to it. So that's the Panzer IIF, and then the Panzer IIc. Let's see, was there slight differences in the turret? Yeah, there were slight differences in the turret, so it probably is a little better armored. And the front, if you look at the Panzer IIF, it's got, oh excuse me, that is not the Panzer IIF. It's got a little better armoring, it looks right here. Plus it's got that extra bogey wheel, it looks like. So, nope, got the same thing. Little hatch right there. This is just cursory glances. Yeah, so it looks like the difference is here and in the turret. Let's take a look at the rear. Much the same. There's some subtle changes here, you know, extra gear and whatnot. Anyway, so that is the Panzer IIF, and which takes us now to the Panzer IIIs, which is our medium tanks. The Panzer 38T also having a classification of medium tank, Panzer IIs being light. The Panzer III, we have a 3.7mm cannon, and it's got penetration of 46 millimeters at 100 meters. The Panzer IIIF with a 50mm cannon has a stock value of 58 millimeters of penetration at 100 meters. And it has a 300 horsepower engine, Panzer 3E has a 300 horsepower engine. So it looks like, let's see, 30, 30, 30, 20. 30, 30, 30, 20. So the armor seems to be the same. So here's our Panzer 3F, Panzer 3E. Yeah, it's mainly the gun. And what's kind of cool, you look at the Panzer 3E, this is kind of a unique turret. This is actually on the outside. The mantlet is basically like on the outside, and it kind of rotates within these little squares. So you can see, looks like two coaxial mounted machine guns and one hull mounted machine gun. So once machine guns are in place, this Panzer 3E actually has more machine guns available to it than the majority of tanks. Although we will look at the T-28 momentarily and see a tank bristling with machine guns. So cursory glances, the commander's cupola there, basically the same. Machine guns are a little different. And then you look at this guy's gun mantlet. It's kind of, this whole plate rotates up and down on this little interior part here of the gun mantlet. So it's kind of an interesting change in design. This is obviously the more advanced design that they moved towards, and this was the precursor to it. You know, obviously they felt like it was much easier to put a big chunk of armor plating on the outside as opposed to having this internal one that could, you know, be less armored and probably easier to jam or damage. So that is the Panzer III. Then that takes us all the way, we've seen the Panzer IV-C and we've seen the Flak Panzer, and now we're on the Stug. So look at the Stug. He's got a 75 millimeter basically short gun, you know, low velocity. It's a tank destroyer, and this thing's going to be really good at tier 1. It's going to have a lot of damage, but the penetration isn't going to be as high because it's got that low velocity. Like, let's compare it. This is a 75 millimeter gun, and it has a stock penetration value of 43 millimeters at 100 meters. Now let's compare that to the Panzer 38T, which has 45 millimeters of penetration at 100 meter distance. So you can see, although this is a more a bigger caliber gun, it doesn't have the penetration of maybe, say, some of the other ones. And let's look at the Panzer F here. Excuse me, Panzer 3F, which has a penetration power of 58 millimeters at 100 meters with its 5 centimeter KWK 38. So, but once you do penetrate with this 75 millimeter gun, you're just going to blow the heck out of the enemy. So let's take a look at this bad boy right here. Where you at, Stug? The Stug 3A Tier 1 tank destroyer. It is a beauty. Looks tortoise-like. Gonna have really good low profile. And you look at that. Look at that right there. That's the periscope. That looks like a weak spot right there, if I do say so myself. You got some plating here in the hatch, and then you got this periscope sitting. So that would be a weak spot I would aim for. You also would want to aim for here, and maybe one of those 2 points if you could hit them. Those are the weak spots of the armor. Obviously lower glasses is usually weaker than the upper glasses plate. And then the big spot, when you want to kill tank destroyers, aim for the drive sprocket here. Once you hit that, this is what powers the track. So you hit that, and you're basically knocking it out. That's what's going to get the tank to stop. He's going to have to repair his tracks because he's going to have, say, tracks are damaged, can't move. Give him a little countdown. You sneak up to the weaker sides or even the very vulnerable rear, and then just put a shot straight into that engine block area in the back there. Light them on fire. This is how you light them on fire, that area right there. So whenever you see a tank kind of catch fire before it dies, that's the spot you're looking for. So now we have what looks like the T-26. We've already seen that. Yes, we have. So let's take a look. We've got the BT-7, which is basically a cavalry tank. You know, when it was that kind of doctrine of thinking, you had lighter, fast tanks. And this thing's probably going to be one of the faster tanks in the game. You look at its engine power, it has 400 horsepower. And it has a max speed of 49 kilometers per hour. So my belief is that while it may not have the highest top speed, it is going to be able, it has really good acceleration. It's a 13.5 ton tank with an engine power of 400 horsepower. Let's take a quick look at the Germans here. 125, 140, I'm looking at horsepower, 300 horsepower, 300 horsepower. The big one here would be the Panzer IV. This is a 300 horsepower tank. This is one of the fastest top speed tanks, the Panzer IV-C. It gets up and moving pretty quickly. So basically what it's looking like now, and the Flak Panzer is actually not very fast, is the BT-7 is the fastest tank right now. And take a look at this. Pretty sweet looking tank. Now the BT-7 versus the BT-5, one of the easiest ways to tell the difference is you look at the top of the turret. On my screenshot speculation page on the forums, a lot of people have found basically BT-5s, and it has like two kind of square hatches that are basically right next to each other. Look at this machine gun port in the back. So you have a rear facing machine gun. Looks like you probably have a coaxial maybe right there. Not as familiar of the interior parts of the turret of Soviet tanks, especially early war tanks. But you look at this bad boy, he looks kind of mean. These are two eyes. He's smiling right here. Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. So let's go back. So the BT-7 has a 45mm cannon, and it's got an armor penetration value of 52mm at 100 meters. That thing's pretty dang good. Then we have the T-34 L11, and this has a 76mm L11 cannon. Now, I believe it was the T-34 1940 L11, which was that unique premium Tier 1 tank you could buy with the tank packs. So, he's got, let's see, we'll take a look at him. He's got that frontal slope armor, but these early Tier 1s, or excuse me, these early T-34s, all of this was basically welded together. You can see right here, it's just one seamless plate, and there's a lot of weak spots. So although it is a T-34, this is one of the earlier ones, and there's going to be a lot more weak spot, but it does still have that trademark sloped armor here, which will bounce lots of shots if you come at it head on and you don't have the penetration, you know, a decent penetration power. This sloping effectively doubles the thickness of that frontal armor plating, so it really helps out in terms of keeping this tank alive. Although historically this cramped the interior part of the tank, made the crews less effective. It's got the coaxial mounted machine gun here, a lot of little doodads up top that I'm not too familiar with, and look at this weird little, you know, they probably have a little periscope that they can rotate around and look around, and it's all like, the majority of it's like, it's welded up here and then it's bolted in the back here, but it's sloped all the way around. So we'll take a look at the armor. The hull and the turret armor are largely the same, although the hull rear armor is only 40mm. Everything else is 45. So if you wanted one weak spot, it would be the rear. You could probably find some nice weak spots here on the turret, like right there. That's a pretty big viewport. That's a pretty big weakness. These are the things you're looking for. These, this front hull-mounted machine gun, that's probably also a weak spot if you hit the machine gun. The gun manlet or roundlet, not so much, but the machine gun itself, very much so. And you look at this bad boy, he's got 450 horsepower at 2050 RPM. This thing's going to be fast too, and it's got really great penetration. So what I've seen so far, this is kind of the king tank. Now you have to keep in mind, the Germans, you know, of these choices, none of these are really built to take on T-34s. You know, your best chance would be your Panzer IIIF with a 50mm cannon, but 50mm cannons, you know, they basically had to up them to 7.5cm cannons to start dealing with these guys, T-34s. So we have that. Let's go back to the research tree. So we've checked out the cavalry tank, BT-7 and T-34 L11, a light and a medium tank, both very fast. Then we have the T-28. So let's take a look at this. This guy's also armed with a 76mm cannon, but he's an L10. So you look at the penetration, 68mm at 100 versus the stock of 72. So the penetration power is a little better, mainly because the gun's going to be a little longer. It has 450 horsepower at 2050 RPM with a max speed of 50 km/h. These two are going to be, let's see, 25 tons, 26 tons. These are going to be relatively comparable in terms of speed, both the T-34, 1941, and the T-28. So let's take a look at the T-28. This is a very unique tank because it has multiple turrets, although the turrets here are machine guns. You see these front two machine guns. You got this big old spot right here. You got your L10 76mm gun. You also have your coaxial mounted machine gun, and then you have this one sitting in the rear. And just look at this. That is just some weak stuff back there. This is a very fragile tank. This is like a tank that was designed basically to charge trenches, is how it looks with all these forward-facing machine guns. This is infantry support as opposed to you know, a down-and-out tank killer. There's a lot of vulnerabilities, plus you look at the size of this tank. It's just so long and it's just so tall. In World of Tanks, I called this thing the Magic School Bus because it seemed like it was as long as a school bus. Let's take a look. T-34, you can tell that the silhouette is much less. T-28, it's almost like 50% bigger, it looks like, you know, from the profile side. Pretty interesting looking tank. He's also got a face. We got the eyes here, and then paint some teeth right there, and you'd have a nice paint job. So we've seen that, and now we've got the ZIS 30, and this bad boy has a 57mm gun. But you look at the penetration. Look at how long it is. The longer the gun, the greater the penetration capability. It's also open turreted, just like the Flak Panzer here. So we're going back to the ZIS 30. It doesn't have much in terms of armor. It has some hull armor, and up here is just all vulnerable. This is your sniper right now, and especially at tier 1. This guy can penetrate almost anything at tier 1 pretty much, and at distance. You know, even at 1,000 meters, you've got 91 penetration, 91 millimeters penetration, and that's stock. And let's see, you can also upgrade your armor, your munitions. 126 millimeters at 10 meters. Versus 120, let's say the 500, 102 and 81, 95 and 91. What's interesting is that since this is a armor-piercing high explosive, the penetration power loses, you know, basically penetration ability over distance, but if you do penetrate, it's going to blow up. So you've got that right there. Pretty sweet looking tank. And then we're going to wrap it off with the T60 right here. So let's take a look at this bad boy. We've seen the T70 in action, and it had a 45mm gun. This one has a 20mm gun. And you know what, just for funsies, let's give it a test drive before these lawnmen are in the background here. We're going to get an idea of this guy's fire rate, because it should be relatively quick. 20mm TNSH. But overall, we're going to see tier 2, so let's get an idea of this guy's fire rate. You hear that? Good lord. It has 58 rounds and it goes through it. We're going to do that again. Let's see. Let's get this bad boy up to speed. This is a light tank where if you get... Man, can you imagine if there's like 6 Flak Panzers lined up, or the rear of a bunch of, you know, lighter tanks armor in front of you, you can just spray 20mm guns. So the thing's pretty maneuverable, and this is stock, pretty decently quick. And then you got this fire rate and ammunition count, which is just unparalleled right now in terms of ammunition count within a magazine and fire rate. So let's take a look. I went there and back and I took my time with it, so that's a lot of penetration. T60 is pretty sweet looking. So we're gonna return to the hangar and look at some of its statistics in terms of armor. You know, what's its max speed and how much horsepower does it have, because when you upgrade this thing it could be pretty dang quick. So let's take a look. T60 is only 5.7 tons, 76 horsepower. That's a problem. Relatively low horsepower, you know, compared to the 450 horsepower and 400 horsepower of the T-34 and BT-7 respectively, and the 450, you know. But then again, it is a much smaller tank, it has basically a fifth the weight of that T-28 and a fifth the tank of the T-34, and you know, almost 3 times the weight of the BT-7. Rough numbers right there. But the penetration power of that tank is relatively low. It's got really good frontal armor for a T-60. He's got 35 millimeters. Let's look at real quick the Panzer IIc or Panzer IIF. It has 35 millimeters of frontal armor, this Panzer IIF. So it's a much bigger tank, light tank as well, tier 1. And this bad boy is also tier 1, has comparable armor. Plus it's sloped. So you shoot at this part, you're really not going to get anywhere. Look at this, what is that, a horn? Yeah, so there are going to be some fundamental weak spots of this tank which you are going to want to exploit. Generally the gun mantlet is one of the strongest parts, but generally there's like little weak spots within the armor. Machine gun brakes, kind of, you know, coax mounts, and then kind of scopes. These little spots right here, if you can hit them, they're definitely weak spots, but it's difficult to be that accurate, especially if this bad boy's moving, which with that much, you know, ammunition, 58 rounds of 20 millimeters, you're not going to need to stay still and fire. Let's see, we got OZT, which is a fragmentation incendiary. You got armor piercing with 25 millimeters at 10 meters. You're going to need to get up close. And then 37 millimeters at 10 meters. This is the rounds you're going to want. I wonder if it's going to slow down the firing rate. And it's high velocity armor piercing. So not the best penetration, but you can imagine this thing shooting at some planes, son. That'll take them down. So that basically wraps up all of the new Soviet tanks. Once again, we have the ZIS-30 tank destroyer, T-60 light tank, T-28 medium, T-34 1941 L-11 medium, and the BT-7 light tank. The Germans have a couple more. We have the Czech Panzer 38T medium, the Panzer IIF light, the Panzer IIIe and F, and then we have the Stug 3 tank destroyer. So a lot of fun tanks to test out. These are likely going to be the majority of the tier 1s for the Germans and Russians. So it looks like we're getting closer. People always ask me, when is it going to come out? I don't know. But we're going to go through all the tier 1s. We'll probably go through tier 2s. Maybe tier 2s and 3s may be lumped up. Then we may get 4s and 5s, and then after that, I think it's reasonable to guesstimate that it will be after that. Anyway, my name is Baron. I hope you all are really excited for these new tanks. Expect gameplay footage coming shortly. And make sure to pull the trigger on that like button and let me know what's your favorite tank of all of these new ones, basically. Right now, I think I'm leaning towards the BT-7 just because I really want to get it up to speed, and maybe the Panzer 38T because it's kind of unique, you know. It's a new, we're used to Panzer IIs, Panzer IIIs, and Panzer IVs, but this Panzer 38T, there's also a 35T, and this is a tier 1, so it makes you wonder where they're going to put the Panzer 35T. Anyway, as always, pull the trigger on that like button. Thank you for watching. My name's Baron, and I'm signing out. Alright, so we're checking out the Panzer 38T. This is a Czech tank. It is rather distinctive looking when you compare it to Panzer IIs and Panzer IIIs that the Germans have. It's got a 3.7 centimeter gun, decent penetration power. It's got a decent size on it. So let's check this bad boy out. Let's get a sound. Pretty distinctive sound. You know, we've heard that kind of before. It's got some nice sloping over the back here, if you look at it. You look at the rear there, over the engine, you got some nice sloping, so that would be, you know, kind of increase the survivability of this tank. It's gonna be pretty awesome. It's got armor piercing rounds, it's got high explosive rounds, which we'll check out, and we're over Karelia right now. It's gonna be a lot more footage. Look at that, the explosions are pretty good looking. Anyway, this is a pretty sweet tank, and it's kind of unique. It's fun to see some Czechs, you know. It's going to be interesting to see the Panzer 35T. So, high explosive rounds, try to fire right through that pillbox hole right there. Nice.